Hello again and welcome to America Votes, Why It Matters to South Asia and indeed the rest of the world. I'm Giles Gibson. The world is just a few hours away from knowing who will be the next President of the United States. Here at WION, we're continuing our comprehensive coverage looking at these elections from the South Asian perspective. But before we move on, let's take a quick look at the latest headlines. Voting begins for the 2016 US presidential elections. Hillary Clinton's running mate Tim Kaine casts his vote. In one last and final push, Hillary Clinton campaigns in Philadelphia, and Bill Clinton and the Obamas join her on stage. Barack Obama urges voters to embrace hope and history by choosing to vote for Hillary Clinton. As the hour of reckoning approaches, Donald Trump's supporters seem to appear confident of his victory over Hillary Clinton. And it's first blood to Clinton. The 12 residents of the small town of Dixville Notch in New Hampshire hand her a 4-2 victory. And in this special program, we focus on Afghanistan. It's been 16 years of relentless conflict in the country, and the conflict has been largely ignored by both candidates in the US presidential campaign. Let's get more on that story.
The Afghan conflict is now in its 16th year, but finds little mention in the US presidential election campaign. Even a NATO airstrike in northwestern Kunduz province, which killed 30 civilians, including women and children, merited no mention. It underscored the point that the news from Afghanistan is uniformly negative. Reports say 33% of that country's 400 districts are under Taliban control. Hundreds of schools, homes and businesses have been destroyed in fighting. Nearly 160,000 civilians have been displaced by the conflict in the first 6 months of this year. The Afghan National Army is at 87% of its authorized strength, but desertions currently at 33% are rising. Worse still, the Taliban is now expanding into areas in the north where they never had a base. From Kunduz to Takhar to Badakhshan, the Taliban are spreading out, plundering mines for semi-precious stones that are sold to fund their movement. Peace initiatives have floundered in the face of Pakistan's determination to be the sole arbiter in Kabul. So a recent report of the Taliban secretly meeting representatives of the Afghan government saw Islamabad respond with a warning that the Taliban leadership and their families would be denied any further sanctuary in Pakistan if they try to cut the latter out. Bureau Report, WION.
All right, let's get more on the US-Afghanistan relationship and how they're watching the US elections currently unfolding. Joining us in this discussion is senior journalist from Kabul, Mr. Sharif Hasanyar, and my colleague in the studio, Surya Gangadharan. Thank you both very much for joining me. Mr. Hasanyar, let's go to you in Kabul first. How closely are Afghans watching this latest US election?
Thank you very much. As I heard in reports that violence is increased this year along north of Afghanistan, and actually the election result is related to the Afghan issue as well, because Afghan is a non-NATO ally to the USA, and USA is supporting Afghanistan, and most of people in Afghanistan were watching the two candidates' debates and programs towards Afghanistan. But unfortunately, the two candidates were blaming each other in this election during the campaign, and they have less focus in Afghanistan. Because of that, the Afghan people and Afghan experts are saying that the election is the result of election is effective on Afghanistan, but still, the people say that two candidates has no exact plan for Afghanistan. At the beginning of the campaign, for example, Trump said that because of Pakistan, if you are going to control the Pakistan, you must focus on Afghanistan. And actually, we know that the Hillary Clinton is continuing the policy or forwarding the policy of Barack Obama. Do you know the policy of Barack Obama that they diplomatically working with Afghanistan and Pakistan?
And Mr. Hasanyar, you say that Afghanistan is watching these elections very closely. I'll ask you, Surya, in our studio, do you think Afghanistan's future is still so closely tied to the US as it has been since 2001?
I think the US needs to find a way out of Afghanistan. They've been looking for that for some time, but I think there's a lack of clarity there on the way forward, and there's a lack of new ideas. During the Obama tenure, we've seen a certain surge in troops in 2014, but now we are back to around 10,000 or 8,000 odd troops. And there are restraints on the manner in which those troops must be used. But in terms of stabilizing Afghanistan, I don't think there's any way, there's nothing we've seen from Washington in that effect. And they've tried the Pakistan, to try and get the Pakistanis to cooperate, and that hasn't worked, obviously. So what do they do next? I think they're waiting for the next president to come in and perhaps think of some out-of-the-box ideas. And
Mr. Hasanyar, I'll cross back to you in Kabul. Do you think people in Afghanistan still see the US as their major partner? Or is there a sense that the United States is withdrawing from Afghanistan, as we're clearly seeing in terms of troop numbers there?
I think there is an hope in Afghanistan that is still USA is our partner, and as my friend said, that Afghan people exactly waiting for the result of the election, that who will be the winner. And as I mentioned to you, that some people are thinking in Afghanistan that Trump is good because Trump is Republican, and Republican is the aim is to fight against the insurgents group, which with Taliban and a Kanu network, and also the Daesh or IS are the groups of insurgents in Afghanistan, which are fascists. The very people that the Kunduz cross with Takhar, Badakhshan, and Samir in the north of Afghanistan is in the conflict right now. But still the people were thinking then and waiting for the result that in 24 hours it will be clear that who will be the winner and what will be the policy toward Afghanistan.
And Mr. Hasanyar, we've been reporting here on WION about, we did a story on Chinese troops potentially moving into the east of the country in Afghanistan. America clearly isn't the only big player in Afghanistan. China are playing a greater and greater role. Is there a sense in Kabul that that's something to watch, that there's a sort of a shift to China perhaps?
Exactly. I haven't received one report that China should be shifted to the east, but as I know, and I think that the USA and Washington is monitoring everything in Afghanistan, and they are closely monitoring through their ambassador to Afghanistan and through their his special envoy to Pakistan and Afghanistan. But we cannot ignore that. For example, Afghanistan is forgetting for the USA, but still the USA is monitoring the situation in Afghanistan, and any, for example, movement which will belongs to the China or belongs to Russia is under the monitor of US in Afghanistan.
And Surya, I'll go to you in the studio. One of the US's sort of clear objectives in this region is cracking down on terror. How crucial is Afghanistan to those objectives?
Well, I think the US has not been able to curb terrorism out of Afghanistan. The fact that the Taliban continues to be active and is gaining ground in Afghanistan is a matter of concern. The Pakistani role here has been largely fudged by the US for their own goals. And in that sense, and one looks forward to see whether the new administration will take a hard look at Pakistan and figure out that the issue is here, this is where the trouble is, let's get on sorting it out. Will they do that? We don't know, because there are so many organizations and vested interests in Washington. And the US-Pakistan relationship is an old one. So one really doesn't know which way this is going to go.
And Mr. Hasanyar, I'll cross back to you in Kabul. How closely are you watching the situation in Pakistan as well?
Exactly, as I mentioned, it belongs to the result of the election who will be the winner. For example, if Trump will be the winner, I'm sure there will be some change in the position, exactly in the position of war in Afghanistan, because, as I mentioned, the Republican aim is to fight against the terror. And when the Hillary Clinton will be the winner, they will come through diplomatic way as Barack Obama continued in the past presidency.
All right, let's discuss the candidates themselves. Can you give me a picture, Mr. Hasanyar? How is Hillary Clinton, how is she viewed in Afghanistan? I mean, obviously you can't speak for the entire population, but what's her sort of image in the country?
Actually, I and most of the people in Afghanistan is watching and looking forward to hear something from the candidates, especially from the Hillary Clinton. But as I mentioned at the beginning, they have some time. But there is a mindset in Afghanistan that when the Hillary Clinton will be the winner, she will continue the Barack Obama policy toward Afghanistan.
So Hillary Clinton is seen as essentially continuing Barack Obama's slow withdrawal of troops and his general approach to Afghanistan.
Yeah. Actually, she will continue the policy of Barack Obama towards Afghanistan. But let me make it very clear that the situation is changing in Afghanistan because now the violence is for example, continuing in the north of Afghanistan. Most of the cities is under the attack of the Taliban, and insurgency is increased inside Afghanistan. But it should be mentioned that the U.S. will not be ready to, for example, to lose every achievement which they have done in Afghanistan in past 14 years.
Surya, would you agree with that a Hillary Clinton presidency would essentially just be more of the same, more of the 8 years of Barack Obama's policy in terms of Afghanistan?
Well, on the surface, that would seem
exactly
so, because she hasn't said anything at all about Afghanistan during the course of this campaign. And one would presume that she'll follow the Obama line, which is again very minimalist. And but where does it lead? It hasn't led anywhere in Afghanistan all this time. And at some point, she has to bite the bullet and decide what does she want to do. Does she want a stable Afghanistan? If so, there are certain steps she must take. And how long does this cauldron of terror keep bubbling over? At some point, it's going to spill over. It already is. So I think at some point, Hillary will have to bite the bullet if she wins and do something about Afghanistan to sort it out.
And Mr. Hasanyar, in Kabul, if Hillary Clinton's presidency is a continuation of Barack Obama's policies, is that something that would be welcomed in Afghanistan? I mean, he's been pulling troops out at a fairly slow but a fairly steady rate.
I think there is the different issue in Afghanistan. Some people are thinking that when Hillary Clinton will be the winner, she will continue the policy of Barack Obama. For those people who are somehow has some small sympathy with the Taliban, they are welcoming that because they are, for example, thinking the best way that finish the war in Afghanistan is the peace process. But the other people are thinking that, for example, in a peace process, Taliban doesn't have, for example, too much rights to deal with the Afghan government and the US by themselves, because Pakistani pushed them a lot. For example, the Pakistani, as mentioned, I think 10 days ago, then very clearly to the delegation of the Taliban who came from Qatar to Pakistan, and said if you're dealing, for example, by themselves with the Afghan governments and the USA delegation, so they will push their family and their leadership in Pakistan, and they will punish them. Now the people are thinking that the peace process, which will be dealing with the Pakistan and Taliban, it is not effective. Because of that, the policy which was Barack Obama played in Afghanistan, and maybe Hillary Clinton will play in Afghanistan, is not too much effective for the Afghan people. For most people in Afghanistan is thinking that the best way is to finish Taliban is push them in military section. Then when we push them, the Taliban in military sides, somehow when we bring too much pressure on the Taliban,
right.
and finally when Pakistani government and Pakistani service, which were at the back of the Taliban, will see that now in a military way it's impossible, so let's go to for example, reconciliation and peace process.
Right, all right, we're going to take a quick break now, but stay with us for more discussion on the US and their role in Afghanistan and how this election might affect that. Don't go away.